Welcome to the third panel, Value Preservation and Transaction Tools in Critical Times. My name is Tobias Blaser, partner at PwC Deals, responsible for carve-out value creation integration projects. And we have roughly 45 minutes for this panel today. The last 10 minutes will be for Q&A, so you are invited to submit your questions and we will discuss them at the end of the panel. You've heard a lot about the market and also the circumstances in the previous session, and the overall environment has changed quite a lot since COVID. We have lockdowns, we have still cheap funding and volatile trade relations. On the other hand, we have enough money, enough dry powder by the private equities and active investors. So it's a quite interesting situation at the moment. What we would like to discuss today with this interesting round is portfolio management, what has really changed in terms of portfolio management and what will come in the upcoming month, how the M&A life cycle has changed since COVID. Will we have short SPAs with a bunch of WI insurance pages? Will we have drones instead of site visits? And furthermore, we will discuss probably the most important question, when the market will completely return. Will this happen in autumn, in beginning of next year? So we have a lot of topics to be discussed, and I'm really happy to have a very good group together. So I would probably ask Sven that you introduce yourself
first. Okay, well, my name is Sven. I'm heading the German office of GIMF, which is a private equity investor, public listed at the Euronext in Brussels. We are investing in mid-cap companies, mainly in growth situations.
My name is Michael. I am Managing Director of Aquinex Germany. We are a W&I insurer and focusing on small and medium sized transactions.
Yes, hello. My name is Fabian Wasmus. I'm a partner with Vitruvian. We are an international growth fund focusing on technology and healthcare. Yeah, happy to be here and part of the group.
I'm Markus Schiller. I run our Frankfurt office for DataSite. Been at DataSite now, formerly known as Merrill, for about 5 years. So hopefully I can provide a little perspective on the new innovations around technology.
Great, thanks. Yeah, starting with the first point, the portfolio management, and looking to Fabian, to the private equity community. What has really changed in terms of portfolio management in the recent month, and what's your perspective on that? What industries do you think has changed and will come back soon, hopefully?
I think in terms of portfolio management, when the COVID environment started, everybody was focused directly on securing cash. I think private equity is trained from past situations to secure sufficient liquidity, and that has worked out pretty well, I would say. And I think now it's a lot more about looking at add-ons, strengthening market position, and looking for growth. And as we are a growth investor, we're very often looking for smaller add-ons, for maybe teaming up with other partners. It's a lot of bilateral discussions that you have with other private equity funds or growth investors, less so large auctions these days.
Do you think the liquidity situation has already been resolved, that they're already thinking about divestments and investments again, or are they still struggling with the financing part with the banks? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, a lot of banks say there is sufficient debt available. I would say it's most likely for some of the companies more difficult because people will look at profitability levels of 2020, which in many cases will be different to the last year. I think right now the equity investors are being asked to support, and I think it makes a lot of sense during that times for add-ons, for example, to provide equity rather than just using debt, rather secure and stabilize your companies, and then maybe do a recap when the environment is a bit different.
Sven, what's your opinion on that in terms of markets and also possible divestments? What's your opinion?
Well, banks are more cautious, of course, at the moment, and we are more cautious as well because we don't know what's going to happen in the next future, and therefore, on top that we always were quite, let's say, not over-optimistic when it comes to debt levels. We are still a bit more cautious on that because we want to always be in a position to take additional opportunities. And therefore, we are ready to, we have enough money on our balance sheet. So we are ready to add additional cash and money if necessary. For many good reasons, this hasn't been the case yet, but of course, we are open for we have a long-term perspective, and therefore the long-term value creation is much more important than a short-term kind of fancy capital structure and financing structure.
If you talk about value creation, what are the typical things you see currently that have to be conducted in terms of value creation? What are the typical measures you see in place?
Well, what you see, even when it comes to valuation, you see, at least is our perception, that very good companies will still find investors and mediocre to bad companies won't find that. And therefore, it's also important that you are envisaging a kind of market-leading perspective strategy-wise. To strive for a strategy which brings you in a leading position against your competitors, whatever it is. And of course that you have on top of that a very efficient organization, a very cost-efficient organization. When you can secure that, value creation is there because, as I said, all investors, there's a lot of liquidity and all investors have a long-term perspective, even if there's a bump on the road, like today, because of COVID, you may see that, of course, you have to deal with some difficulties, but we are quite optimistic that the number two and maybe the number one and the number two might even be stronger compared to number three and to number four in the same market. And that's what you have to achieve, and this is a great moment to try to do so, to get there.
Are there any no-go areas in terms of industries at the moment you see, Fabian, where you say it's not not the right moment?
We are entirely focused only on technology and healthcare. So for us, it's
you are a lucky one.
It's a very good environment, but valuation hasn't come down at all. It's rather the opposite. So it's also a challenging environment. You need to pick the winners, and a lot of other funds are now suddenly also tech investors. So it's more difficult. I would say anything around industrial, automotive, but also consumer goods related companies have a more difficult situation. Some of them are profiting from the setup, from the shift to online, so that there's good opportunities. But in general, I think we will see the real impact only from next year onwards. I think this year there has been a lot of support from governments and funding and reserves companies have built, and that will really only be impacted next year when the situation has changed there. So your prior question regarding value creation, I think it's very important that the private equity industry really focusing on cost optimization, setting up the right structures and organization, and is working with the portfolio companies. I think now the good investors are separated from the ones that only were looking for financial engineering, and like Sven said, we are working very actively with the portfolio companies.
So that means that not only the management is looking for the value creation part, so this will be then also supported by you and your team. You're deeply involved in all the value creation.
We have an in-house consulting team, for example, at Vitruvin, that puts a lot of work and efforts into that as a sparring partner. Yeah.
Very good. Good. You already mentioned that you think the real picture will be visible next year. From your point of view, how the real picture will look like, and what might change also in terms of the portfolio management?
Portfolio management, I would say that's not that different. I think it will become more virtual. We've just been really our very first entirely virtual exit. And with a partial reinvestment, no site visit, no nothing around that, and it works. And I think a lot more people will turn towards tech, online, and virtual tools to communicate and source data and analyze documents. I think that's something that will change a lot going forward.
So you mentioned the entire M&A process was a virtual process. How you have done basically things like the site visit? Have you used drones for for low-key warehouses, or how has it been conducted?
I think as long as the management teams know each other and have met before, it's much easier and you don't have to do the site visit. We haven't thought about drones, but it might be an interesting thing to do, at least a fun thing to do. But I don't think we are fully ready yet to have drones flying into the buildings and taking pictures, etc. outside. It might be. But
we've
not
used
yet.
this in, I think it was in April at least, for some warehouse locations. Obviously, if you go for the production sites, it's a different stories, but we also use people who have cameras on their helmets. For sure, 3 days before signing, somebody wants to visit at least the high priority locations, but we had pretty good experiences in terms of the drones. What about the data side of the transaction process? What has changed from your perspective?
We don't do drones. That's probably more an Elon Musk kind of topic at this point. But we've definitely looked into it. Actually, funny enough, so we've heard some demand for it, but it's not something we would see on multiple transactions or a high demand for it right now. I think for us, we really, if we look back at this year, there's probably 3 phases. We had this phase of, well, everybody had to go home, and there was complete uncertainty, and people just needed some kind of tool to be able to collaborate. So it wasn't so much that we need to get this due diligence going, or it was purely, hey, how can we share documents? How can we collaborate? Right? Because a lot of companies that we work with, also some advisors, were not ready for that. Then we kind of got into phase 2, where people were a little bit more ready, and some of the processes that probably have been postponed were picked up again. We also saw some restructuring, some imminent restructuring. I mean, there was some bankruptcies. I don't think they were hugely pandemic related, so they probably just were well-timed, I should say. And then now I think we're in a third phase where we see the market picking up quite extensively, and here it's all about being more functional. So we're trying to have a lot of tools that we're trying to develop, and we brought out a lot of tools that some have existed before, but people did not really want to adopt them, and now change, is welcomed. So it's about structuring data, for example, right? We have less time now. People are dispersed, so you upload a huge amount of data. How do you structure that conveniently without sitting next to each other, discussing it? How do you collaborate in that environment? And funny enough, it's good timing for this, but we developed an AI engine that can structure data quite easily, and we see quite a bit of demand for that, for instance.
Do you see special things that are required based on the COVID situation, and that will also remain afterwards? Or do you think some things will change again back to pre-COVID?
So one thing that we see now is that there's probably more assets that come to market at the same time. There's less people that have to deal with potentially more assets, especially because a lot of advisors have, how should I say, widened their approach. So, we used to just be a data room vendor, and now we're trying to develop tools across the whole M&A lifecycle. So we have an asset marketing platform. So we see demand for that, and we see more automation in general in terms of, approaching potential buyers.
So could you explain a bit the automation part? What is the new thing in that one?
Yeah, I think it comes willingness to change. It comes down to adoption, right? There were some tools there before, but people have been working like this for 10 years, 15 years, and getting people to change. You can have the best tools, but there's not that huge willingness. There was not this huge willingness to change, and now people are they're willing to wear masks in public everywhere, right? They're changing their entire life, and then going from Excel, email, Office to maybe one tool that can encompass it all is not that big of a risk for them anymore, right?
Yeah. If we look to the legal part, the SPA part, and this also goes hand in hand with the WI insurances. How is the current situation? Do we have really small SPAs with WI insurance packs? Could you elaborate a bit on that one?
So it's really interesting question. Our observation generally is the new normal is that there are less of normal deals at all. Yeah, so usually we see about 500, 600 deals a year. So we assume that we have a relatively good market overview and see a lot of SPAs due to this. But in this, it already starts with transactions. We only see less submissions for typical private equity transaction, private equity, with a standard set of warranties, fairly balanced, perhaps an auction process only with 2 or 3 bidders. What we see is on transaction side, very small transaction, which never reached out before to us, like family-owned offices would use the situation, or niche products, or specific IT niche products, less global footprint, so with a limited risk profile. And from an SPA perspective, we see the entire range. So it starts from very broad warranty catalogs we have never seen before, because no one wants to buy this target, and the sellers are not in a good position to negotiate warranty catalogs. So they are looking to limit their own liability, perhaps in case of sell-side policies, which we have bound, I think last year 1 out of 100, and this year it's 20 out of 100. So it's a huge demand now for sellers to mitigate their risk, not in way of the SPAs, but in way of insurance solutions. And in other transactions, we see where the seller is in a quite good position, or he's in a so bad position that is completely distressed and always sold by an insolvency administrator, that nearly no warranties except for title in the SPA. So last SPA we saw had more 20 pages. So they look for completely synthetic warranties and transaction solutions to mitigate the risks. But this also goes hand in hand with the due diligence. So we see not like the normal due diligence, like a red flag we have seen for private equity deals. We see, on the one hand, very cautious buyer doing extremely sufficient, thorough, and deep due diligence. And on the other hand, several deals where they are completely reluctant to due diligence because they just buy it for €1. And therefore, we need also provide solutions to mitigate this.
What could be potential solutions for these situations?
So I think there are 3 potential solutions. So if the seller is really not in the best position to negotiate SPAs, and the buyer can push him to give warranties and reliable under the SPA, he can reach out for a sell-side WI policy, so that he can limit his liabilities in this way. The other way is just provide a completely synthetic insurance product, so that the policy is not even linked to the SPA, so that this is really a completely standalone risk mitigation policy without any negotiations with the seller and interaction with the seller, just for the buyer who can deal with the policy. And of course, we need to find a solution to provide synthetic due diligence, also to act a kind of due diligence provider, where we can also give with our advisors to bridge this gap of due diligence.
Okay. In terms of the due diligence process and the previous transactions you have experienced, Sven, what is your opinion on the situation? What has changed if you look to management presentation, expert sessions, site visits, and what's your opinion on the changes?
While deals, all in all, and the processes related to these transactions are getting more and more complex for many, many reasons. And the key reason is we are investing only in companies which are performing well and which we can bring to the next level. That's the first point. So I cannot talk about...
So you have to buy from Fabian?
Probably, yeah. Or we're looking at the same ones, I don't know, yeah. Without knowing. And so I cannot talk about special situations and restructuring cases. However, due diligence became much more complex because, as stated before by Fabian, prices haven't dropped yet. In this, let's say, challenging environment. So you are already struggling in understanding the company, understanding the business plan, understanding the strategy, getting closer to the people. Are they able to manage this kind of challenging situation? Is the better business plan related to COVID? Are they profiting from the situation or not? And all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of additional new questions around, let's say, the key topic: how do we understand the company and what's the price tag we can put it at? And I'm not talking about financing at this point of time. Therefore, and on the other hand, you have always to be in a situation where you can secure a process. Therefore, of course, tools like a W&I insurance, it's at least my perception, already became and are getting even a more important part in all of this process. Even if you cannot completely outsource certain risks, however, it is one important tool to make these processes work more smoothly. That's one point. Of course, this is valid even for, of course, if you are considering an exit structure. The second point is we are completely astonished how well video conferences, managing presentations or video conferences are working. People are getting used to it in a very short period of time. We are also able to bond with the management. So, of course, content becomes more important. It's not only are these the right people, but over the content you are getting closer to each other because you get the feeling about a common understing.
Would you buy a company without?
We did so.
Okay.
We did so, and we sold even a company. We sold a company in COVID times in a one-to-one situation, and we partnered with two other portfolio companies with other investors without meeting and seeing them. We knew them before, to be honest, but we did not talk about the deal. We just had, let's say, very superficial meetings before that, and then all of a sudden we were approached by an US investor, and it was literally impossible to get there or that these guys could come over, and we managed an exit, contra load. We sold it to a US company.
Is there a kind of special COVID due diligence now in place that you have a special DD on things, or does it relate to all things of the company?
It does relate to all things. You have to somehow mitigate the risks. You have to no. There's nothing which we do completely different. We already were used to have a kind of a virtual collaboration, even amongst us, of course, and amongst trusted advisors we have around us. So the only topic is how can we include the management and the sellers part, of course, in these processes. So no, it works well, astonishingly well. But of course, it's always better if you can go there, if you can see the site, if you can touch the people, if you can touch the product, so on and so forth. It depends maybe a bit on the individual company. Maybe it's easier to get hold of a tech company than, for example, a consumer company where you really have to get the feeling about the product. Maybe, but even some people said some years ago that you will never buy shoes online. I don't know. There are some companies around there which prove the difference.
How difficult is the discussion about is it a recurring or one-time COVID impact in discussions with sellers and buyers from your point of view?
Yeah, that's difficult to see, and also here it depends a bit on the sector. If you look at automotive, for example, they got really a hard hit from COVID, but this is on top of a structural change. So it's really difficult to understand, is it COVID related or is it a general problem? And on the other hand, of course, there are many companies which are profiting from COVID, and you have to understand why they are doing so well, and will this last forever, basically? Is this really, and that's, of course, a key difference. So, of course, there's always it's a key point to understand, is it COVID related, is this a one-off or a one-time opportunity, or is this really changing the game, and how is the company positioned there? That's, of course, a key question. So, but there's no general answer on that. You have really to look at the company, at the respective company, to understand the influence and the impact in detail. And of course, then there are deal structures linked to that. How can I? But I guess we come to the point a bit later.
Sure. What's your opinion on the COVID standalone EBITDA impact? How do you see this topic? Do you see it similar to Sven, or have a different opinion?
Well, if I'm on the seller side, I would probably argue this is a one-time effect, and I adjust for it entirely and assume it was not there. That's probably not reality, and it's probably more of in some industries, the COVID impact will be long-term. If you look at maybe the travel industry, I think that everybody recognizes has a long impact. In some other industries, in services, where people were just prohibited to go to work and that impacted the revenues being generated, I think now that the lockdown is away, they're fully back to normal. And you see a lot of, if you look at the revenue curve, they dipped and now they're back to normal levels. And I think that's something you need to recognize when you invest in a company. So you cannot just say, well, this year you only have 50% EBITDA, so I pay only half the price. Others will adjust for it and pay a higher price. So you probably need to go along. And I think the private equity industry is very good at paying high prices and trying to normalize everything they can, and on the buyer as well as the seller side. And so I don't see a long-term impact on valuation, not at all. I think we are not seeing that. For good companies, you pay even more right now because you want to invest in stability and in performance. Some industries have changed a lot. I think anything on digital transformation, if you just look at food delivery, anything around e-commerce. E-commerce has for many years now been not so much en vogue. A lot of investors said, well, that trend is over. And now a lot of investors are coming back and saying, well, maybe it's something to consider and go back into because it seems to be more sustainable than people thought. So I think that's what we're seeing in the market.
What if you experience in terms of the transaction processes similar to the discussion with Sven, how the management presentations have been conducted, DDs? Could you elaborate a bit on that, and what's your opinion that if it was okay or that should be the case in the future?
I think also here it's a temporary part. I think for 6 months now we have seen a lot of bilateral discussions, less so auction processes because they simply did not work in that environment, but a lot of parties that proactively talk to each other. I think Sven mentioned teaming up with some other investors, doing an exit. We've done the same. We've done a lot of individual transactions that were bilateral. Even in COVID, I think we've done this year more deals than we did last year because it was much more a direct communication environment. I think we're now seeing in Q1 next year a change because then the M&A advisors will have more transactions to bring to the market in a more structured way. People can meet in person again, and you have maybe seen the impact of COVID, which has been normalized, and now people are looking out for 2021 as a forward-looking base for valuation. So I think processes will normalize from next year onwards. Currently, we're still seeing a lot of bilateral discussions.
And you also see a lot of partnering at the moment, where corporates need cash and would like to set up JVs. Is this also a common topic at the moment?
I think also something Sven alluded to, structure-wise, with still some insecurity in the market regarding where business will go, people will ask for team-up or reinvestments. People will ask for earn-out structures. So I think a partnership right now is probably the right way to go. Somebody who has a portfolio company would like to see an exit, but it's not really feasible, might be better off to roll part of the investment and bring in a new investor, maybe do a step-by-step exit. So yes, I think partnerships are more en vogue currently than they have been in the past.
Okay. You already mentioned looking forward. Nobody knows what will happen in January or 1st of April next year. But what's your bet for next year? Your forecast for next year?
Well,
industries,
if I would know,
companies.
I would probably gamble at the stock market. But I think my guess is that people will start to forget about this one-time corona impact because there will be vaccine solving the main problem of people being afraid of getting infected. So I personally think the market will return to rather normal, but some industries have accelerated during that time, and some transition or shift in how we deal with deals or how we work will have changed. But the private equity market, there's so much money in the market, I think it will go on. I don't really see a big risk for a further dip.
Yeah, and if you look at the different asset classes, where you're going to invest, if not in productive assets?
Yeah.
Is it gold? Is it private housing? Is it commercial real estate? I don't know. Yeah. So at the end of the day, raw materials, I think productive assets and therefore public and private equity will maybe even get more attractive from an investor's perspective. So I'm doubting that we will lack money. It's the opposite.
Yeah. Which is good for us.
Yeah.
And the service providers that we work together with. So.
Do you think the big corporates will divest a lot in the upcoming months? So I mean, everybody thinks, okay, that the big corporates have now the money from the banks, and now they have to look what they have to cover by themselves. What's your opinion on that?
I think that's probably the right question to ask, because the big corporates are typically the ones that were most impacted by this crisis. So they will look onto how can I get liquidity, how can I focus on my core business, and we are already now seeing some carve-outs and some divestments coming. So yes, I think so. Yeah.
So are they currently in preparation then to send out the teasers in January of February? So what's your opinion on that? Or are they already in the market stage?
I think they're already in the marketing stage. At least the advisors are already out there pitching that this will come or something's being considered. But a carve-out from a big corporate takes much longer than a normal private equity transaction. And I think there's some specialists on the investor side that deal very well with this industry. And that's something for probably a different kind of investor than we are. I don't know so much about GIMF, but on our side, we probably would not so much look for a carve-out because it's a different kind of skill set you need. But there will definitely be a lot more like that. We will see insolvencies at some production-related companies, service-related companies, and those will also be spun off. Yeah.
Do you talk about the smaller, medium, or big size tickets from the corporates? Because I think that's also the interesting question. Currently, the deal sizes are still, I would say, low and medium sizes. Do you also think that the really big transactions coming back in autumn and beginning of next year?
Well, we hope so. Let's put it this way. I think you're right. We're seeing probably smaller to mid-sized transactions currently because it's also something a corporate would buy. So I think we see strategic investors looking for opportunities, and they would probably not buy the very large ones, but maybe the smaller ones. But I think private equity will come back to the market with some larger exits, which will be picked up by either private equity or corporate. So it's both.
Looking to the next year, you must have all the data available. What will start beginning of next year?
Which, of course, I'm not allowed to disclose and will not. And no, but what has been mentioned before, we do see a shift in sectors as well, right? So, I mean, we should not forget even healthcare and tech, right? There's a lot of startups that are struggling right now, so we need government intervention, and there's some money there, right? So fundraising is an issue. In healthcare, a lot of hospitals, you know this better than me, are going bankrupt. So we're seeing a shift in types of deals and sectors, also on the restructuring side, which is coming more and more. Now, to your question, so since we're now at the kind of the pulse of the industry, it doesn't really affect us too much whether a deal closes or not, right? We're engaging on the technology side, so we do see a strong surge in especially mid-market deals, as you mentioned, and at what stages they are, I'm not really supposed to disclose, but we're seeing a strong evidence of a market recovery. Let's put it that way.
And I think that's a good...
Which is positive. I think the whole panel was quite positive in their outlook, so we kind of see the same thing.
Perfect. Maybe your opinion on that one, the market return. How do you see it?
So from our perspective, the entire COVID period was very interesting. So even lockdown started, flight was cancelled, but in April we were quite busy, right? So all deals which were close or nearly close to final and to get signed, everyone was pushed through. So even in April we don't see much broken deals, perhaps one or two for only very specific industries like aviation or so, but in April it's okay. Then there was only a small dip in May and June, and July it's now picking up, and August was quite more busy than last year. So we've seen more transaction August this year as we have seen last year. So our impression is that everything came back now to the market, which might have been postponed in March or April. So that would be hopefully a second wave of deals, not of COVID, in the autumn of this year.
What's your forecast, Sven?
Well, I think we have a lot of money. There are a lot of companies out there looking for capital, either to because they are in a restructuring phase, or because they need to recover from the COVID experiences, or because they want to grow in this environment. So all in all, of course, it had an impact on the valuation of our portfolio, and so on and so forth. But there are plenty of new opportunities out there. But I wouldn't underestimate the crisis, because I think it's not that as soon as we have a vaccine, it will basically fade away. It had a harsh impact on the whole economy. On top of that, in parallel, we have some other processes. Look at China, look at the elections in the US, and so on and so forth. So it's times are not as stable as 2 years ago, and somehow we have to deal with that. So people are more cautious. Risk of broken deals is much higher. So all I want to say is we are not. I hope we are not dropping into a too long-lasting crisis. I'm rather optimistic, but I wouldn't just rely on the vaccine and then it's all fine again.
Good. Thanks for the forecast. And I'm just looking. I think we have received some questions from the audience. One goes in terms of WI. Which developments, Michael, do you see in terms of WI?
I think the first development, perhaps everyone is interested regarding pricing, pricing and commercial terms. I think this is an interesting one, as there are only very few very interesting deals with low risk profile in the markets. We have the impression that pricing even does not go up, even Corona crisis. Perhaps an interesting one, retentions go low, de minimis goes low. So for the interesting deals, pricing stay at least stable or to the benefit of the insured and the investors. From a coverage position, everyone is of course keen to have no general exclusion for COVID-related issues, but this has now come market standard, so there's not longer discussed in the market. And what's really what I said at the beginning of the discussion, it's new challenges for the new situation. So more coverage requested by the sellers instead of the buyers, more synthetic products requested, in particular for corporate deals. And this will pick up, I think, extremely when there will be more really distressed transactions, where the insolvency administrator is in the lead and will not give any warranties, so everyone looks for synthetic coverage under W&I policies. And I think this is the most important link, goes always hand in hand with synthetic due diligence products. So we must also be prepared to be in a position to conduct more due diligence on our own, to be more comfortable with warranties, and to go deeper into the transactions and business which have been done before, right? Because we were in a very comfortable situation, often bidder processes, low due diligence, stable market situation, low risk profiles. But also for us, it would be more challenges to go deeper and to gain more knowledge and to extend our also experience on this.
Okay, thanks. Just looking to the audience questions. This was maybe a topic for our PE community. Is post-merger integration more challenging during COVID versus pre-COVID? Maybe Fabian,
yeah,
you first.
Yeah, definitely it is, because for post-merger, I think it's particularly important that you do face-to-face meetings, because you need to work on bonding, on chemistry, and bring people together. And that's a bit more different now, in particular if you merge with international partners. So yes, I think that has changed a bit and makes it more complex.
Indeed, post-merger integration is always a very critical process you have to deal with. The only positive aspect which might make it a bit easier is that if you do a add-on acquisition in these times, everybody might be a bit more committed to this specific transaction. And so the starting point could be a bit easier, but the process, of course, is always difficult, and it hasn't at all become easier because of these, as Fabian just mentioned.
Maybe one improvement to before was, I think if I look back at the habits we had in our company, was video conferencing was a pain, and people didn't really like to do it. and people thought it doesn't really work, and you cannot hear people. I think now there's a much higher acceptance for it, and people get used to it and do it in a different way. And if they use Zoom or Teams or anything like that, it becomes a standard tool. I think in particular for PMI, you need to communicate. And if I see we just merged with a French company, one of our portfolio companies, there's so much Zoom interaction on a daily basis that people simply have the habit of using it and use it differently. And I think that's very positive.
And that's important, to use it differently, because everybody's sitting at home, and there are not just 10 people around one table, and there's a video screen flimmering at the wall, and there are two, I don't know, aliens out there, which are not getting any access to the team, which is talking around the table. But the problem is for everybody the same. Everybody's sitting at home or in his remote office, and it's a more democratic approach. So the way how we do video conferencing has widely improved, and therefore it's easier, quicker, and so technology, of course, helped a lot.
So what we usually experience in the integration and carve-out projects is that the cultural aspect is a very important one. Would you then say, everybody is in the same bad situation in the home office, it helps in terms of the communication and change management process?
Yeah, a bit so. Of course, culture is an important point, always. But I'm afraid that cultural differences became a bit the catch-all clause to find the proper excuse why something did not work out. And it's easier to manage integration processes when you are more focused on real content, which is the same content all around the globe, of course. And therefore culture has been a bit pushed away because of video conferences, because there was not so much time left to have, I don't know, joint dinners, lunches, and experience other countries. Everybody was sitting at home. You came right to the point. The content was much clearer from the very beginning. You had to come to a conclusion, and so on and so forth. So therefore, cultural difference were just pushed away, and therefore nobody felt it that intensively any longer. And I think this is a good outcome, indeed. So on the one hand, the globe has, of course, a bit more decentralized again. On the other hand, we experienced it became much closer to each other. It's a bit of twofold situation, of course.
Very good. Anything to add from?
No, I think the willingness to adopt, to use the various features, some of which we've developed a long time ago, and some of the new ones, we have AI-based redaction now, which is a big thing. If processes need to prepare, and they have just that much time to redact documents and to prepare big assets. And you can now press a button and 90% of the work is done for you. Now people trust in technology, I think. Previously, there was always a hesitancy to, no, we haven't done it this way, but now people they're willing to just give it a try, right? And then they're quite often astonished with the results. And I think looking into the future, people will just rely more on these tech tools.
Very good. Yeah, I think then, thanks a lot for the panel participants. I think we learned a lot about WI insurance, that the business is going well, that on the buy and sell side we have enough deals and hopefully even more deals and the bigger deals this year and next year to come. And we have lots of opportunities in terms of the data side processes, and looking forward to all of the upcoming processes.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think this was an extremely positive approach at the end, which is, I think, nearly a final word. Thank you to our fabulous panelists, to all of you on stage. You did a fantastic job in a new environment with microphone, camera, looking nice into the camera. Thanks to our followers here at your computer, at home, or wherever you are. We constantly were a number of 300 people following us. This is really fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, we experienced the 9/11, 2002 and the 2008, 2009 downturns. And our experience was that there is a downturn and afterwards things are coming back again. And we hope that our 2 or more vaccines are available by the beginning of 2021, and this will help to normalize the world, hopefully.
And in that context, obviously, we hope that MuMAC 2021 will be back to normal. We will meet in person and face-to-face. And after the conference, obviously, at the Oktoberfest, ideally in the Schützenfestzelt as usually. You all continue to invest intelligently, hopefully. Good luck at being ahead of the crowd. Thank you.
And stay healthy, stay safe, wear your MuMAC 2020 mouth and nose cover. It will hopefully be a one-time 2020 gimmick. And see you all back in 2021. Bye-bye.